Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 20-Minute Investment Podcast brought to you by the Life Design Lab and the Center for Student Success at Johns Hopkins University. I am your host, Medina Sani, the Assistant Director for Programming in the Hopkins program. And today, our second episode, we are going to be talking about using the side and back door, an alternate approach for getting opportunities that you want. Joining me today, we have one of our favorite students, also a Hopkins student, Mr. Manny Hernandez-Meza. Everyone, let's give him a round of applause. Hi, Manny. How are you?
Good. I'm great, Medina. How are you?
Good, good. So just to give the audience a little bit about who you are, I'm going to go ahead and read your bio. So Manny is currently studying economics, international studies, and financial economics at Johns Hopkins, where he is also the president and co-founder of Enactus, which is a social entrepreneurship organization that creates enterprises with sustainable social impact and competes in international pitch competitions, if that wasn't a mouthful. So a presiding official of the JHU Conduct and Ethics Board. And after interning as a law clerk at the Los Angeles Public Defender's Office and interning at the Pro Bono Resource Center of Maryland's Immigration, Manny is also passionate about exploring new areas of law. With that in mind, he is currently interning at CARE because he believes in the inalienable protections of civil rights, regardless of national origin, religion, or race. And finally, not really finally, but in addition to all those amazing things that he is doing, he has also recently developed a keen interest in finance. And so he's now pursuing investment banking. And so if you heard all those things that I listed about Manny, I'm sure one of the things you're thinking to yourself is, how do you do all of that? How does he make all of that work? And so that's why we have him here today. So Manny, thank you so much for joining us on our second episode of the 20-Minute Podcast. We hope that this will be super, super fruitful. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Last week we spoke about maximizing relationships with alumni and, taking steps to have that first conversation when it comes to networking and trying to get informational interviews. So what would you say is the first rule of requesting or requesting a networking meeting or informational interview? Like, what do you say is the first thing everyone should know when they're trying to pursue sort of these opportunities through the back door, quote unquote?
Yeah, that's a great question. First off, thank you so much for having me. I think it's really exciting to share a little bit of my experiences, and hopefully they're a little bit helpful to everyone. But I think the first rule of requesting a networking meeting is to not request a networking meeting. So what do I mean by that, right? And what I mean by that is when you're reaching out to people to maybe your end goal is definitely getting an internship right at a particular place, or you want to get a job. What I mean by not asking for a networking meeting is to not lead with what you want, saying I want to get that job, I want to get that internship, or I need to network with you, right? That makes it feel very transactional from the get-go, right? And the person you're reaching out to, they don't really have an incentive to give you anything when you don't really know them. They don't know you, and maybe they'd be taking a huge risk or a huge workload to get you that opportunity. So that's what I mean by don't lead with trying to request a networking session, but rather I think you should request a learning opportunity. The way I kind of approach it is reaching out, saying hi, my name is Manny, give a little bit about my academic background and tell them I would really love to learn more about this particular experience you have. Would you be available to connect? Because at that point, there's no expectations that you're imposing on them, right? It's just, I'll share with you what I know. And if you lead with that, it'll be a lot better primer for that conversation to go really well. And that could very well lead to what you want, right? But you're not leading with that.
I absolutely love that because it takes the pressure off, right? There's no fear for the student, for example, to feel like I have to be perfect in order for them to give me something. And, for the person who's on the receiving end, there's no pressure for them to feel like they have to also give the student something, whether it be a job or an internship. It's just about collaboration at that point, talking and getting to know and sharing information. And there's one thing that I've also noticed and learned is that people love to talk about themselves, and they also love to talk about what they do. and, you know, they love to mentor, even if they don't know it cognitively, or they're unaware of it. Most people, and I can say most, which means 51% and up.
Yeah.
Most people, if you ask them, hey, tell me about your job or your career, how did you get into it? They're like, oh, well, grab a couple lemonades, sit down, let me give you all the ins and outs and the ups and downs. So I love that about like not leading with what you want to get from it, but actually approaching it as a learning opportunity, which it very well is. So what kind of, let's say the person says, you know what, sure, Manny, you're great. You know, let's have this conversation. So what kind of energy or vibe or mindset should you, you know, have it, like, should you enter the conversation with?
Yeah, that's a great question. And before I say that, I just want to add one tiny thing that I forgot to mention in the first part is that when I reach out to them, I add my availability for 1 to 2 weeks out, right? For every single day of the week, because ultimately you want to reduce the number of times that they have to communicate with you and make it as easy as possible for them to say yes that time. So I just wanted to like put that out there because I think that's a really big part to getting as many responses as possible.
That's fantastic. We're going to just take a slight detour and come back. In general, like when you are requesting anything, whether it's to have an informational interview, for someone to come speak, or to produce a workshop for you, give them as much information up front. When you're requesting recommendations, same thing. Give them everything up front so that they don't have to ask you each and every time, because that becomes consuming, annoying, and a huge toil. You know, many of us, or many of you who are listening, are probably in a state where you're considering asking someone for a recommendation. When you do that, send your resume, send your transcript, send the questions that the recommender may need to answer, send when the deadline when you need the recommendation. That helps move things along faster, and it doesn't seem like this cumbersome, clumsy process. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, Manny. You know, if you're requesting a conversation with someone, send your availability. I am available on Monday from 2 to 6. And let's say you forget to do that, and the person that you're requesting asks you, when are you available? Don't return the response with whenever you're available. Give specifics, give a date, give a time, give a time frame, and give some that are vast. So thank you for sharing that. Now, the original question.
Of course.
Mindset, energy. What's the vibe? Like, how are we going in here? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with the mindset, right? Definitely the mindset that I go into, that is two-pronged, really genuinely wanting to learn, right? Because you don't really know, you yourself probably have no idea what the job is really like. So taking advantage of what their experiences can tell you, but also showing that you've done your research, that you actually care enough to get the background on your own. And I think, so in the last part of my bio mentioned my pursuit of investment banking, and I'll touch on that later on. But with that, it's definitely been a really great opportunity for me to learn about the industry, but it's super important that I do so before I approach people, because then I can hold a sophisticated and educated conversation and show that A, I care enough to look it up and to know about their background, and B, I can get more out of that conversation versus saying, tell me about what you do. They'll be like, okay, I do this, XYZ, but that XYZ is something I could easily find on Google, right? Don't waste their time. Don't waste your own time. Make it more productive by learning a little bit on your own, so that when you go into that, you can first learn as much as possible because you have the background to do it. But secondly, you can impress them, say like, wow, Manny knows what he's talking about, or this person knows what they're talking about. I'm enjoying this conversation, and I'd be really happy to help them succeed if this is what they want to do, because they clearly care enough to look things up and to learn.
That's awesome. And if you listen to our first episode, that was one of the things that our guest Cameron Little and I discussed, is doing your research and doing your homework, so that you're not asking, just like Manny said, you're not asking questions or asking about things that you could literally find on the internet on your own. Like, hey, what is an analyst? Or, hey, what is a trial lawyer? You know, you are asking questions that demonstrate that you have at least a general understanding, and that you are genuinely interested in the industry or in the work that you're having the conversation about. So let's go a little bit more into that. Like, what kinds of questions do you ask or are appropriate to ask during an informational interview?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I would usually, so then I can speak a lot on like how I would approach, you know, someone in investment banking, because I've been doing an endless amount of calls on that, and I've been keeping a log, and it's a ridiculous number. But the way that I approach it is, you know, learning a little bit about their industry and specifically what group they're in. Like banks are split into groups. So breaking into that, I kind of lead with some questions on, you know, how are you? Well, let me think of how to generalize it, because then I don't want it to just be like focused on banking, because that can be unique. But I kind of approach it with questions, first off, starting with what you know already from learning online, what they might do. So asking, like, maybe you learned about like a particular type of transaction or task that's very common for a lawyer or for a banker. You can say, is this something that accurately reflects what you do, right? I learned about this. Do you do that? And if so, what are some really great examples that come to mind, like a particular case, a particular transaction? Can you share with me how that went? So that gets them into like a very narrative answer, right? They're not going to tell you yes, no. It's not going to be closed. They're going to be like, well, let me tell you, this was the people involved. This is what I've learned. And that can be a really great opener for a bunch of different things that you can pick from their story and lead, you know, with further down in the conversation. So I guess I would ask about, you know, examples of their experiences that might relate to the first question. And then other questions I would ask, I mean, ask as much as possible from what you've learned online, right? Confirm, and also kind of like, once you learn things, you'll kind of like pick up on some questions about the specific industry that you're looking up. So I think those questions come naturally from researching it. But something that I like to think of towards the end of the conversation, right, is saying, wow, I really appreciate what you've told me. I think it's really interesting. And I realize that people that take this first step in their career end up in a really diverse trajectory afterwards, right? There's a lot of options you can have. What is your career outlook? Because, for example, for me, I'm super goal oriented, right? I love to have a goal that takes me 5 years to get to, with, you know, recognizing that maybe it's not going to happen. Maybe things change, but having that really broad goal keeps me motivated on a bigger picture. So that's why I like to hear what maybe other people's bigger pictures are. Sometimes they might be like, oh, I'm not sure, I'm working it out year by year. But sometimes you get people that tell you, well, I think that my big picture is this. And that is really inspiring to me. And that can let me see, like, do I want to do what they're doing? Because if that's where it lands them, do I want to be there in 5 years, in 10 years?
Definitely trying to forecast, right? Like trying to see, where is this person who's 4, 5, 6 steps, years ahead of me, where they headed? I think another thing too is, especially for, you know, our audience is mostly Hopkins students right now. Hopefully it'll be students across the country.
Yeah.
But most of the audience are students, and you haven't actually worked in the industry where you're requesting the informational interview. So you have full experience of, you know, what you're requesting. One of the things that you might want to think about is, what does it look like on a day-to-day, right? What are the greatest things about the job or the work that you do, and what are the worst things that you want to do? For me, coming into higher ed, you know, the first informational interview I ever had was with Dr. Dean Stein at Stony Brook University. And the question that I remember most clearly, because at that point I thought, I want to be a dean of students. I said, what is the worst part of your job? And he said, the worst part of my job is having hard conversations with parents. You know, if it happens to their children on campus. You know, we've had students that have passed away. And so having to have those kinds of conversations with parents or with families is probably the worst, the absolute worst of it. I had never thought of that before. You know, the capacity in which I knew him and understood his work was always very fun and very supportive and very engaging, you know, but a dean of students is very much a hands-on in every aspect of the student experience. Kind of job. And so to hear that made me really stop and think about, like, oh, so anytime there's a crisis on campus, anytime there's, you know, something that's negative that happens to students, their hands are in it. And so that gave me something to consider. And so when you're thinking about having informational interviews, you want to think broadly. What is the day-to-day like? What is the hardest thing? What is the best thing? How difficult or easy is it for you to move up and around from where you may be? And ultimately, like you were saying, Manny, what is the overall outlook and trajectory for that particular position or industry.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I would say with that, not only asking them to look forward, right? I was just thinking right now, something I really asked them to do is look back, right? When you were in college, or maybe if they had to go to graduate school, when you were there, what values did you have, or what did you want out of a career? And also what experiences led you to do this, right? Because it can let me kind of reflect more on where that I am right now and resonate with it, with, you know, that, with whatever they tell me, because they're going to tell me what their perspective was when they were my age, maybe. So I think it's really great to ask them to look forward and backwards as well, because I think that'll maybe come up later on, but that's what really inspired me to make the shift from focusing on law school to focusing on investment banking, because of the experience of a lawyer that I really love to talk to still, but just by listening to his values, I realized he was a person similar to myself. And by hearing him say what the flaws or what the shortcomings of his current job were, I realized I wouldn't be happy in that position. So that's what really is really helpful, to look forward, but most importantly, look backwards, because you can relate to that the most.
Right. And of course, asking the question, if you were to go back in time, what things would you have done differently? What would you have taken the time to learn when you were my age that would have been helpful for you now? I think Hopkins students in general are really good at, you know, chasing down all the skills and personal developmental things that they need to move them forward. But I think hearing that from someone who is in a position or in an industry that you are looking forward to is really awesome. So I am great personally at asking and requesting information on interviews, but I'm absolutely terrible at maintaining relationships. Time my mom asked me about my best friend from like 3rd grade, and I was like, I don't know that girl no more. You know, to me, it's always been just a little bit awkward. After you've had the conversation, you say thank you. How do you keep that conversation going? How do you keep that line of communication open so that they're not just a one-time, thanks, we collaborated, we had this great convo, and I'm gonna, you know, take information and run? How do you keep that going?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, because we often talk about how do you expand your network, but then after I reached out to a lot of people, I was like, okay, I have a bunch of people that I've spoken to. How do I avoid being months in the future and be like, wow, I have not talked to this person? So it's like maintaining the network, your connections. So I've kind of approached that 2 ways in, you know, recruiting for investment banking. First off, I mean, with anyone that I've spoken to, I've started to record it in an Excel sheet, right? So I have this really big Excel sheet with, you know, I don't even know how many people I've spoken to this summer or have given me the awesome opportunity to speak with them. But I, you know, split it up into their name, their industry, their educational background, and their LinkedIn, as well as the date that I spoke to them and the last date that I spoke to them since, right? So I can be like, at a glance, being like, okay, I'm, you know, really been thinking a lot about investment banking recently. You know, I have these people I spoke to. When was the last time I spoke to them? You know, let me, you know, hit them up again, or just let them, or can reconnect. And the way that I reconnect, it doesn't have to be, you know, you don't have to be asking the same things that you did at the first call, right? Because that's probably the most formal call you're going to have. Hi, my name is Manny. I'm interested in yada, yada, yada. And they do the same thing. You're not going to be, unless, I mean, if you have conversations like that on the regular, that might be a little bit weird, but usually you're going to want to make it more casual. So what I've done is just follow up after a holiday. Hey, I hope you had a really great 4th of July. Did you have any special plans? And say, best Manny. If they respond, they often ask what you did. You can start building that relationship. And I think that question is also a really great segue from what you asked before. What question should you ask in an information or interview? Because I always like to end the call by asking them about their personal interests, right? I ask if it's okay. And I say, like, what do you like to do in your free time, or what have you been doing more of in quarantine? Because then it helps you make them a person in your memory, but also vice versa. Like, they care about, wow, Manny cares about what I enjoy to do. And that gives you a really great follow-up topic. You can, for example, a recent example that I had, I was speaking with a banker, and I found out that she really likes to do paint by the numbers, which is kind of like those big paintings that you paint in with like different numbered segments. And I like to do that too. So then I actually was sending her pictures of the painting I was doing as I went, and she was doing it the same way. So vice versa. So that was a really great opportunity for us to organically stay in touch and to share something that we both enjoyed. So that's what I would say.
Absolutely. Like humanizing the process, right? And so when you send those, you know, hey, just saying, hey, how's the holiday? That's time to this. If there is anything that has happened between when you spoke to them and when you're reaching out, updating them. Thank you so much for the conversation that we had. Since our conversation, I have done, or this great thing happened, or, you know, after our conversation, I realized that I don't want to be a doctor. I actually want to be, you know, a professor or whatever it might be, our doctors, but you know, I might want to do something different. And then, you know, have the conversation thereafter. But I love the fact that you made, or the point that you made about asking about them as people, you know, what they enjoy doing, you know, how do they spend their time? What have they been doing during COVID? Because they'll ask you the same thing and help them get to know you. And, you know, I know it myself as an advisor, you know, when opportunities come up, I first think of the students that I know most personally. You know, if I think about investment banking, or I meet someone, I'm like, oh, I know Manny's interested in this. Let me see if I can connect him with this person. Or, you know, X student said they wanted to do something in marketing. Oh, I know someone that's in that field. And so humanizing the process, one, making yourself human, and the person that you're speaking to, looking at them as a human, does help make, you know, that conversation last and continue and ultimately turn into somewhat of a mentorship kind of relationship. So I think we're probably or potentially nearing our 20 minutes. So I'd like the last few minutes, or give you the last few minutes to share some words of wisdom or some life lessons or things that you think students need to know in order to attain opportunities through the sort of back or side door.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, so what I would say to that would be recently, so I mentioned pursuing investment banking, right? After talking to lawyers, I wanted to do kind of like the other side of the coin in the area of law that I was interested in, finance. And so after talking to a lot of people and really working hard to study that material, I was able to land 2 different super days, which if you happen to know a little bit about banking, that's the very last interview that you get in order to get that offer. And so I went through the super days and I just sat there reflecting as I was talking to these people. And even right afterwards, when I got an offer from a bulge bracket and also from a smaller bank. But I just thought like, wow, like who would have thought that a year ago I would have been able to do this, but why did I do it, right? It wasn't just on my own, although I did put in a lot of work. It was the people that were around me. After I got those offers, everyone that I had spoken to at those banks and that had helped me emailed me saying like, wow, congratulations. Like, we're really excited. We're here to help you, whatever you decide. But I just realized like, wow, like this is kind of like the power of making connections, making relationships. Because I think when we think about networking, we think of a very cold transaction and it's very self-motivated. But I think maybe you can think of it as relationship making, right? Because I know for me, I want to talk to these people way down the line if they're willing, not because of a job, but because I was interested in something and they helped me get closer to that. So I built a relationship. And a little bit more on that point, one of these opportunities that I interviewed for, I actually, had the amazing opportunity to interview for it in the first place because when this institution was recruiting, they reached out to a Hopkins professor saying like, hey, we're going to be recruiting. Who would you recommend that we reach out to? And so with this one professor, I happened to engage with them a lot over the summer, over the year. But most importantly, I told them what I wanted to do. I was like, I'm really interested in pursuing investment banking and telling them a little bit of that story of the transition I made. So that professor thought of me to, refer me. And I would have never even thought of that opportunity if it wasn't for that professor. So the takeaway from that is think of, the power of making relationships and become comfortable with that, but also tell people what you want to do. No one's going to be able to guess what you want to do. And if you have a really great story, share it, because then it's going to help people remember you when opportunities come up. That's not the first time something like this has happened to me. And each time it does happen, just reinforces, the value of telling people what I want to do, because who knows who might want to help me at some point. And so it just opens up doors that way.
Yeah. And even if you aren't certain, if you're undecided as a major, talk to people about being undecided. Talk to people about, well, I enjoyed this, but I haven't decided what my major is or what my second major is going to be. Just speak to people because folks will share their insight and provide guidance. And that can ultimately help you figure out what you'd like to do. Before coming into higher education, I wanted to be a dentist, even though my grades didn't say so or think so. But I certainly wanted to become a dentist. And when that didn't happen, or when I realized that wasn't going to happen or was unlikely, I started to talk to people about, well, I have an interest in working with students. That's something that has always existed. I've always been like a camp counselor and things like that. I love my college experience, you know, what is out there. And that's how I sort of stumbled into this field that I enjoy so much. So thank you so much, Manny. You know, just to wrap up, plan, you know, everyone, if you're thinking about taking this step and having informational interviews, get your Excel sheet together, plan out who you're going to speak to and what your questions are going to be. And then on the second tab, you know, start tracking the conversations that you've had. Like Manny said, you can have their name, their contact information, their LinkedIn, and the first time you had the conversation and the last time you spoke with them. And just that will help you sort of be consistent. Build a community, not based on what you can get, but around relationships overall. And of course, it's always reflection. Think about what has been done and what you'd like to do in order to move forward. So that is our 20 minutes. We're probably a little bit over. I am Medina. You are?
Manny Hernandez. Thank you for having me.
And that wraps up our second episode of the 20-Minute Investment Podcast. Thanks. Join us on our socials, and hopefully we'll see you in the fall.
Yeah, thank you again.
No problem.